Okay, the reading for this week is the next part in our series on classical Chinese civilization and philosophy. And today we will be reading selection from the Xunzi, or encouraging learning. And Xunzi is, whenever you hear Xunzi mentioned, think of human nature is evil. This idea of Xing that he's most famous for. Xunzi, born in 310, so around 310 BC, died in 219 BC, so we're dealing with the 3rd century BC here. Lived at the very end of the Zhou dynasty. Like Mencius, or Mengzi, he was an advocate and interpreter of the teachings of Kongzi, or Confucius. Living a generation after Mencius, so first we have Confucius, then we have Mencius, and then we have Xunzi coming a generation after Mencius. Xunzi lived through the final brutal wars which ended the state of Qing, which ended with the state of Qing, the dynasty that first unified China after the Zhou dynasty. The state of Qing absorbing and unifying all the Chinese feudal states. So remember that there were 7, I think, warring states at the time, fighting for decades and centuries before that, and then finally the Qing state ends up gobbling up, emerging victorious and gobbling up all the other states, and this is the period that Xunzi lived through, the unification of all of the area, all of China, under the Qing dynasty. Xunzi was a widely traveled scholar, teacher, and official. Okay, the passage is fairly long this time, so I'm going to read the whole thing without much commentary. And let's see, the learning of the noble person enters here. The noble person knows. Okay, so this passage about the noble person, or the Junzi, is the most important, and I'll emphasize that when we get to it. Before I read the extended passage, I'm going to read the study questions, and then we'll go over these in class. Question number 1, what is the purpose of learning? The purpose of shui, gaku in Japanese, as seen in these passages. Okay, so remember that his ideas about education and cultivation are grounded in his idea that human nature is evil or rotten, or it tends toward the bad. Question number 2. Compare Xunzi's understanding of learning, shui, and the purpose of learning with that of Jewish, Christian, and Hindu thinkers. So this is the comparative religion question that you often see in these worksheets. Compare his idea of learning with those of other world religious traditions. Question number 3. How does Xunzi distinguish between the noble person, the Junzi, and the lesser man, or the Xiaoren? What might be the social and political roles expected of the noble person? Okay, so what responsibilities and social and political roles does the Junzi have, according to Xunzi? Question number 4. What does Xunzi mean when he says that the Junzi, or nobleman, may be taken as a model and a standard? Okay, so the common people are expected to emulate, are encouraged by Xunzi to emulate the Junzi. All right, here is the selections from the Xunzi where he discusses the importance of learning, and called Encouraging Learning is the subtitle of this section. The noble person, or Junzi, says, learning must never cease. Blue comes from the indigo plant, yet it is bluer than indigo. Ice is made from water, yet it is colder than water. Wood as straight as a plumb line may be bent into a wheel that is as round as if it were drawn with a compass, and even after the wood is dried, it will not straighten out again, because this is the way it has been bent. Okay, this metaphor of bent wood is very important in Xunzi. Underline it. We'll discuss its use as a metaphor later in class. Thus, wood marked by the plumb line will become straight, and metal that is put to the whetstone will become sharp. The noble person, the Junzi, who studies widely and examines himself each day, will become clear in his knowing and faultless in his conduct. Therefore, if you do not climb a high mountain, you will not know the height of heaven. If you do not look down into a deep valley, you will not know the depth of the earth. And if you do not hear the words handed down from the ancient kings, you will not know the greatness of learning, shui, and inquiry. The children of Han and Yue, and of the Yi and Mo, all make the same sounds at birth. But as they grow up, they have different customs, because this is the way they have been educated. Okay, so all humans are the same at birth, he's saying, and that environment and custom and so forth molds them in different directions according to the different tribes and peoples of the earth, but they are born the same, namely evil, according to him. The Ode, or the Shi Jing, says, quote, "O you noble men, O you Xunzi, do not be constantly at ease and at rest. Be thoughtful in your official positions. Love those who are upright and correct, and the spirits will heed you, and will increase your blessings." There's a footnote about the source of that Ode 207. Of spirits there is none greater than being transformed through the Tao, the way. Of blessings there is none more lasting than being without misfortune. Once I spent an entire day in thought, but it was not as good as a moment of study, Shui. Once I stood on tiptoe to gaze into the distance, but it was not as good as climbing to a high place to get a broad view. Climbing to a high place and waving will not make your arm any longer, but you can be seen from farther away. Shouting down the wind will give your voice no added urgency, but you can be heard more distinctly. By borrowing a horse and carriage, you will not improve your feet, but you can cover 1,000 li. By borrowing a boat and paddles, you will not improve your ability in water, but you can cross rivers and seas. The noble person, the Junzi, is by birth no different from others, but he is good at borrowing from external things. Okay, so a Junzi is not born a Junzi, but he learns from external things. So remember, whenever we're reading a Confucian or a Neo-Confucian philosopher, keep in mind where they stand on this issue of externality versus internality. Are they more? Do they place the emphasis more on the inside, the Qing of a human, or do they say that goodness must come from external forces, such as yi and customs and propriety and li and so forth? In the southern regions, there is a bird called the Meng dove. It makes its nest out of feathers woven together with hair and suspends it from the tips of the reeds. When the wind comes, the reeds break, the eggs are smashed, and the young are killed. This is not because the nest is wanting, but rather because of the way it is attached. In the west there is a tree called the yigang. Its trunk is 4 inches tall, and it grows on top of high mountains, looking down into chasms 100 fathoms deep. This is not because the tree's trunk is able to grow, but rather because of the place where it stands. Okay, so again, he's speaking in parable, he's speaking in metaphor. Whenever you see metaphors employed in these Confucian works, underline them and think about them deeply. And we'll go over them in class, what he's trying to get through by using these metaphors. And he gives several in a row, too. The next one is, if raspberry vines grow in the midst of hemp, they will stand up straight without being staked. If white sand is mixed with mud, it too will turn black. If the root of the orchid and the rhizome of the valerian are soaked in the water used to wash rice, the noble person, the Junzi, will not go near them, and the commoner will not wear them. Not because their substance is not beautiful, but because of what they have been soaked in. Therefore the noble person, the Junzi, will choose with care the place where he will reside, and will be accompanied by scholars when he travels. In this way he avoids depravity and meanness, and approaches centrality and correctness. Accumulate earth to make a mountain, and wind and rain will flourish there. Accumulate water to make a deep pool, and dragons will be born from it. Accumulate goodness to create virtue, and spiritual clarity will naturally be acquired. There the mind of the sage will be fully realized. Thus, if you do not accumulate little steps, you will not have the means to journey 1,000 li, and if you do not pile up small streams, you will have no way to fill a river or a sea. Though a thoroughbred like Qi Zhi cannot cover 10 paces in 1 leap, the sorriest nag can do it in 10 yokings. Achievement consists of never giving up. If you start carving and then give up, so now we have a carving metaphor of a carver carving wood. If you start carving and then give up, you cannot even cut through a piece of rotten wood. But if you persist without stopping, you can carve and inlay metal or stone. Earthworms lack the power of sharp claws or teeth, or strong muscles or bones. Yet above ground they feast on the mud, and below they drink at the yellow springs. This is because they keep their minds on one thing, crabs. Now, crabs is the next metaphor. Crabs have 6 legs and 2 pincers, but unless they can find an empty hole dug by a snake or a water serpent, they have no place to lodge. This is because they allow their minds to go off in all directions. Thus, if there is no dark and dogged will, there will be no bright and shining clarity. Okay, the word for will, I think, is shi, kokorozashi in Japanese. Thus, if there is no dark and dogged will, or shi, there will be no bright and shining clarity. If there is no dull and determined effort, there will be no brilliant and glorious achievement. Okay, so will and determined effort are important for in cultivation. One who travels 2 roads at once will arrive nowhere. One who serves 2 masters will please neither. And here's the important passage. The learning of the noble person enters his ear, is stored in his mind, spreads through his 4 limbs. Remember the 4 limbs of Mencius that Mencius talks about? We already discussed those in a previous video. Spreads through his 4 limbs, which are metaphors for the 4 virtues, and is made visible in his activity and his tranquility, in his smallest word, in his slightest movement, in everything. He may be taken as a model and a standard. So this is the part that's mentioned in one of the study guide questions. The Junzi may be taken as a model and a standard. All of his movements, all of his thoughts, all of his words should be taken as model and standard. The learning of the lesser man, the Shang, enters his ear and comes out his mouth, so it doesn't stick, it doesn't stay with him. With only 4 inches between ear and mouth, how can he possess it long enough to beautify a 7-foot body? In antiquity, learning was carried on for the sake of oneself. Today, learning is carried on for the sake of others. Again, there's a footnote about this here. Okay, we'll go over that in class. The learning of the noble person, the learning of the Junzi, is for the sake of beautifying himself. The learning of the lesser man, the Shang, is offering bird and beast to win attention from others. Thus, to prefer information, so learning for its own sake is the point he's trying to get across here. Thus, to prefer information when you have not been asked for it is called officiousness. To proffer information on 2 questions when you have only been asked about one is garrulity. Officiousness is to be condemned. So too is garrulity. Garrulousness is the more common way of rendering that. The Junzi, noble person, is like an echo. In learning, nothing works so well as to be near a person of learning. So if you want to attain self-cultivation, find somebody who's cultivated and learned and follow them as a model. In learning, nothing works so well as to be near a person of learning. The rites, remember the Li Jing that we've already discussed, the rites, one of the 5 classics, the rites and the music, the Yue, provide models but no explanations. So if you have models, you don't even need explanations, I think is what he's saying. The odes, the shi, and the documents, the shu jing, are devoted to antiquity and lack immediacy. The spring and autumn annals, the qiu chu, is laconic and not readily accessible. But following alongside a person of learning and repeating the explanations of the noble person, the Junzi, bring one honor everywhere and allow one comprehensive knowledge of the world. Okay, so when you have proper models for emulation, you don't even need fancy or detailed or complicated explanation. Therefore, it is said that in learning, nothing works so well as to be a person of learning. In the course of learning, there is nothing more expedient than to devote yourself to a person of learning. And next to this is to pay homage to the rites, the Li, the rites, propriety, ritual, and so forth, Li, that we've already discussed. If you can neither devote yourself to a person of learning nor pay homage to the rites, the Li, how will you do anything more than learn randomly or passively follow the shi, the odes, and the documents, the shu jing? In this case, you will never, to the end of your days, escape from being merely a vulgar scholar, a vulgar Ru. Remember, Ru is also the kanji, the character for Confucianism. If you would take the ancient kings as your source, and humaneness and rightness, ren, and humaneness ren, and rightness, yi, as your foundation, then rights, li, are the means of correctly ordering warp and woof pathways and byways. One who misses one shot in 100 does not deserve to be called a good archer. So again, the archery metaphor that we often see in Confucianism and Confucian writings. One who does not take the last half step in a journey of 1,000 li does not deserve to be called a good carriage driver. One who does not comprehend moral relations and categories and does not become one with humaneness, ren, and rightness, yi, does not deserve to be called good in learning, shui. Surely learning, shui, is learning to unify oneself. Someone who on departing does one thing and on entering does another is a person of the roads and alleys. One who does a small amount of good and much that is not good is a jie or zhou or robber zhi. Complete it, realize it to the fullest. Only then will you be learned. And the final paragraph. The noble person, the Xunzi, knows that what is not complete and what is not pure is unworthy to be called beautiful. Okay, this is an important paragraph here. Underline this first line. So the noble person, the Xunzi, does something to completion. Therefore he recites and reiterates so as to integrate it, reflects and ponders so as to comprehend it, determines his associations so that he may dwell in it, and eliminates what is harmful in order to preserve and nourish it. Okay, so study must not be superficial. Whatever you study, you must incorporate it and apply it to your daily life and fully digest it. He causes his eyes to be devoid of any desire to see what is not right, his ears to be devoid of any desire to hear what is not right, his mouth to be devoid of any desire to say what is not right, and his mind, his Xing, to be devoid of any desire to think what is not right. Having arrived at this, he, the Xunzi, takes utmost pleasure in it. His eyes will take greater pleasure in it than in the 5 colors. Okay, so the sensory world. 5 colors is a sort of metonym for the world of sensation and sensory perception. His ears will take greater pleasure in it than in the 5 sounds. His mouth will take greater pleasure in it than in the 5 flavors, and his mind, his Xing, will benefit more from it than from possession of the world. Therefore he cannot be subverted by power or profit, nor swayed by the masses and multitudes, nor unsettled by the whole world. He follows this in life. He follows it in death. This is what is called holding firm to inner power. He who holds firm to inner power, so underline inner power, he's stressing interiority over exteriority here. He who holds firm to inner power is able to order himself. Being able to order himself, he can then respond to others. He who is able to order himself and respond to others is called the complete man. Heaven, Tian, manifests itself in its brightness. Earth manifests itself in its breadth. The noble person, Xunzi, values his completeness. All right, that's the end of this rather long passage. We'll go over the study questions in detail in class and some other issues that appear in this excerpt in class. See you then. That is all for now. Goodbye.